последнее время появилось кое-что новое в действии.
The actions of the occupying power have taken a new form lately. They've started to restrict the rights and opportunities of our lawyers. Unfortunately, few of them have left Crimea. There is no freedom of speech, human rights aren't respected, and there are no fair courts in Russia. Attacks on the office of lawyer took place. We see it as a signal. Any time it can happen again, and criminal proceedings can be opened after that. If a publication of 2013 was considered an administrative offence, then criminal proceedings can be opened for more substantial publications. In case the criminal proceeding is opened, you are automatically under threat of disbarment. There was a period when I was sent to a psychiatric hospital to undergo a forced psychiatric evaluation. And at this time, the lawyer Polozov, in my interest, went to the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, where he called me a member of the Mejlis, even a deputy chairman of it. Now they demand his testimony to find out whether it's true. Despite the fact that he refused to testify, the FSB investigator recorded it and now he's turned it into a witness in the case. Another innovation that was introduced is that instead of opening criminal proceedings that require a long procedure of hearings, they have now taken over the practice of opening administrative proceedings. They accuse a person in an administrative offence. Usually it's a publication or repost in social networks, and imprison him for 10 to 15 days. A resident in Simferopol, Margalen Mustafayev, has recently been imprisoned for 11 days. But another innovation has turned up here. They were taking photos and filming on their phones, and for that they were imprisoned for 5 days. 10 people were imprisoned for 5 days, and Margalen for 11 days.
What actions can you take now? What can the Crimean Tatar people do, the Mejlis?
The actions we can take are rather limited. We don't recognise the referendum held in 2014. We don't recognise the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation in Crimea. We don't recognise the annexation of Crimea, the occupation authorities. That's our silent, non-violent protest. And for most importantly, we continue to live here. We are a real thorn in their side. The majority of Crimean Tatar people still live in Crimea. Only a few have left. According to our calculations, 20,000 people out of 300,000 have left. All the rest still live in Crimea.
What is Crimea like after 3 years of annexation?
Materials in the Ukrainian media have appeared recently saying it's necessary to postpone the issue of returning Crimea, proposals on renting it out. Someone has ideas that it's better to forget that Crimea is Ukrainian. We have to understand that Crimea is Ukrainian. There are Crimean Tatar people who disobey and continue to live in Ukraine. You may notice that we only have Ukrainian TV channels in our homes. Actually, we live in a parallel world to the majority in Crimea, who believe that we joined Russia. They are a bit frustrated, and they still constitute the majority.
A lot of bureaucrats were replaced by Russians. What actions can be taken now to get ready for the fact that Crimea should be returned to Ukraine?
На практическом уровне любые действия, которые сейчас будет делать Украина, они никак...
In fact, any action taken by Ukraine won't have any influence in Crimea. There is a need to work on the increase of economic sanctions against the Russian Federation. I don't see any other way. Sanctions should be expanded, and the Russian Federation itself should finally realise that it can't pretend about Crimea and some parts of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. It should be Russia's initiative to return Crimea. I don't see other solutions, because the peninsula is too militarised and there are no military forces able to resist the military power established nowadays in Crimea.
Какие вы на этом этапе думаете должны быть, я не знаю, экономические?
At this stage, what should the economic relationship with Crimeans be like on a social level?
Крымчанами.
Во взаимоотношениях между Россией и
I consider that Russia is guilty in all the negative things about what has happened over the last 3 years. Crimea was Russian even when it belonged to Ukraine. The only fact, it wasn't a part of Russia. I mean, the Russian language, ideology, pro-Russian majority. Everyone except for the Crimean Tatar people voted for the Party of Regions here. In such a situation, it was nonsense to scare the supporters that Ukraine will seize the Ukrainian territory. But people believed in that and organised the referendum. It was the imitation. In fact, the troops entered Crimea then. The main intelligence agency, GRU, organised the seizure of the first administrative building, the Verkhovna Rada, and the Cabinet of Ministers of Crimea. It wasn't a problem for Russians to enter Crimea. There was no oppression of the Russian language. And now, the non-Tatar population is frustrated by their actions or the actions of the Russian Federation. They got neither decent pensions or higher salaries. Prices in Crimea are much higher than in Moscow or Kyiv. You've also mentioned that a lot of people have arrived here. They still continue to arrive. If 20 to 30,000 left the peninsula, 300,000 on the contrary arrived in Crimea. And I think when the issue of real deoccupation is raised, everyone who came to Crimea after March 2014 will be forced to leave the peninsula. But those are the technical aspects that will be discussed when such processes begin. The economic sanctions against Russian Federation may fasten such processes. If the world's leading countries along with Ukraine strengthen the sanctions, the process of reintegration and deoccupation will happen faster. I'll emphasize once again that I do not consider the military options to be appropriate here.
Скажите, вы вспомните, каким был...
Do you remember February the 26th, 2014? What was it like? A lot of people have probably forgotten about it. Some people only remember the so-called fake referendum. Do you remember the days before it and the 26th of February in particular? How did it happen? How did you find out about it?
That period was very tense. Starting about the 20th of February, each day we received signals that the Verkhovna Rada of Crimea was going to make separatist decisions and appeal to Putin with a request on Crimea joining the Russian Federation. Then almost every day we were gathering at the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people and were conducting some meetings, making statements and preparing a resolution. The period was very tense. We even maybe didn't realise the verge of what events appeared.
What was the 26th of February like?
Это был очень напряженный период.
We've had information about the intention of the Speaker of the Crimean Parliament, Mr. Konstantinov, to hold a session and appeal to Putin. We had information that the message should be of separatist character. We neither saw it nor read, but the subsequent events confirmed our suspicions and intentions of the Crimean, then Ukrainian authorities, to make separatist decisions. We decided to hold a rally in front of the Verkhovna Rada of Crimea to show our attitude to the possible development of the events in Crimea. We were against the separatist decisions and stood for a united Ukraine. We were chanting, "Crimea is Ukraine." In the square from the other side of the Verkhovna Rada of Crimea, supporters of political force Russian Unity gathered with Russian flags. When we stood with the Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar flags, they, on the contrary, had Russian flags in their hands and were chanting, "Crimea is Russia." They gathered to put pressure on the deputies, so they made the decision on the referendum, followed by Crimea's joining Russia a lot faster.
Was there an understanding of what was happening in terms of the military security forces of Russia?
Вот честно, положа руку на сердце, скажу, такого четкого...
To be honest, there was no clear understanding or awareness that it could lead to such things. Even at night, when it was over, and Refat Chugbarov asked everyone to go home, the majority of people did that. We were saying goodbye to each other and thought that probably there wouldn't be any separatist movements in Crimea for another 10 years. Everything happened not in the nearest future, but on the same night. All happened on the night of 26th to the 27th of February. Russian main intelligence agency troops in unmarked uniforms conducted the seizure of the Cabinet of Ministers and the Verkhovna Rada of Crimea. I think the leadership of both the Cabinet of Ministers and the Verkhovna Rada knew about that because there was no resistance at all. There were no orders to any units. In fact, there were more than 300 military units in Crimea. No single unit received an order to resist or take any action against what was happening in Crimea.
Как вы думаете, можно, не знаю, вести эту, как это сказать?
Can the fight for the hearts and minds be effective in this case? The point is that there are people concerned for their life. Not all of them are politically active. Many of those who weren't politically active and decided to remain here have started to assimilate. They've gotten used to the fact that textbooks and flags have changed. What can be done to win the hearts and minds of the people? Should we just accept the fact that there will always be some people ready to live under any political power?
Ангажированы.
I think that at this moment there is no need to fight for their minds. Now we need to care about the legal issues in the international arena, in the United Nations, the Council of Europe, to negotiate with the leaders of the major world powers to return everything to the original state. Ukraine had a chance to struggle for the hearts and minds of the population for 23 years. If you stay in Crimea for a couple of days, you'll realize that there are two parallel realities here: a Russian world, which has a lot of supporters despite all the difficulties in one reality. The world in which we live, in which people continue to consider Crimea a part of Ukraine, won't accept the annexation and are ready to wait for the deoccupation as another reality.